Hi everyone, and welcome back to Easy as IEP. Today we'll be talking about session 3, parts of an IEP. As always, my name is Catalina Uribe, and I'm a clinical support administrator at the UM-NSU Center for Autism. Today what I'll be doing is I'll be taking a Broward County Public School IEP, and I'll be going through each of the sections top to bottom. We'll talk about important dates, the parent input, the 4 domains, present level of performance, annual goals, objectives, accommodations, and related services. Since each of these sections have their own sessions in this IEP training series, I won't go too in depth, but I did want to provide a general overview of everything else that we'll be covering in this training series. So first, we'll start with the dates, right at the very top. In the last session, vocabulary and acronyms, we talked about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IDEA requires public schools to reevaluate kids with IEPs at least once every 3 years. Some refer to this as a triennial reevaluation. The purpose of the triennial is to see if your child's needs have changed and whether or not they still qualify for special education services. If you remember from last time, special education relies on an eligibility, not a diagnosis. So it's entirely possible for a child to make such significant progress over time that they don't need or qualify for an IEP anymore. It's also possible, though, that parents and schools agree to not doing a triennial reevaluation, but this must be done in writing. So for example, maybe after reviewing your child's records and progress, the IEP team together decides that there's already enough data to support continued services and set goals, and therefore you may deem the reevaluation unnecessary. However, you should keep in mind that even if it's clear that your child is still eligible for services, his or her needs and functioning may have changed. A reevaluation can give the IEP team more information about what to include in the IEP and make sure that it's specific to the child's ever-growing needs. Unlike an initial evaluation, you shouldn't have to specifically request a triennial evaluation since it's required by law to happen. However, it's always best to speak with the child's IEP team to ensure that the process is initiated in a timely manner. And then aside from the regularly scheduled triennial, there's also the option for a parent or teacher requested reevaluation. Under IDEA, a child may be evaluated only once per year. So while technically you are allowed to have a reevaluation every year, it can't be more than once a year. Some common reasons why an early reevaluation takes place is if your child wasn't originally found eligible for services but is still struggling, if there are new areas of concern, so maybe the behavior wasn't a problem during the first evaluation, but now we're here at in a new school year and it's really impacting the child's learning. So you might want to get an early reevaluation. You might also want this if the information from a previous evaluation was incomplete. So if we take the example of the coronavirus pandemic, maybe your child was being evaluated for services right before this started, and for the sake of helping the child, an IEP was developed, but really the observations, the assessments, everything that was used to evaluate the child may not have been the best record. So once we go back to school, it might be a good idea to request a reevaluation. And then finally, you might want to request an early reevaluation if your child is headed to college soon. So next, we get into the program. As I mentioned in the last session, there are 13 eligibility categories for special education. This may include specific learning disability, other health impairment, autism, emotional disturbance, so on and so forth. According to the evaluation findings, a student will have one or more program eligibilities. So for example, if you're watching this from the Center for Autism, your child probably has an autism eligibility. However, they may also have additional eligibilities such as language impairment, visual impairment. Maybe they have also an ADHD diagnosis that lends itself to the other health impairment eligibility. So anything of that will be noted here under the program eligibilities. These are all of the reasons why a child qualifies for these services and why this plan is in place. The second portion down here relates to second language services a child may be receiving. All students evaluated by the Multicultural ESOL, which is English as a second language, and Program Services Department, or the school-based language assessor will receive a language classification that ranges from non-English speaker with minimal knowledge of the language all the way to monolingual English speaker. This is especially important with initial evaluations for special education programs because a language classification or reclassification within the past year is necessary. If any other language other than English is spoken regularly in the home, even if it's just by the parents, a child should have a language classification on file. A classification will help provide the most accurate results in evaluation. To determine whether a child has a language disorder, for example, a speech therapist will need to know if the child has a lower language classification. That way she knows whether it really is a language disorder or if it's just learning differences from knowing two languages and from not knowing enough English language. The ESOL program status, which is right here, refers to the level of services related to English language learning the child is receiving. This ranges from being enrolled in classes specifically designed for ELL, English language learning, students to exiting ESOL before and after 2-year following. So essentially, a child is either receiving specific classes in English to be able to better handle the language, they're exiting ESOL, but they still need 2 years of following, or they've completed the 2 years of following where they've been monitoring the child's progress, and if there are problems during those 2 years, then they get reclassified and they are again enrolled in those English language courses and all of that. And then finally, once they are complete with the 2-year following, there was no more problems. There's no more need for this English learning, so they'll be completely out of the ESOL programming. Next, we have the parent input. When you receive your 5-day draft, so remember, in Broward County, we do follow this pretty closely, even though it's not a requirement. If you are in other counties, you definitely can ask for this beforehand. What Broward County typically does is that 5 school days before the IEP meeting, the parent is sent home a draft of the IEP. That way the parent can read over it, make any comments, make notes to prepare themselves for what they want to accomplish during the IEP meeting. And one of those papers is the parent input section, which includes 4 boxes, but you are not limited to these boxes. So for example, the boxes are: describe your child's strengths, describe your child's success this year, describe concerns you may have about your child, and include any additional concerns, helpful information, or questions you may have. You can go ahead and abide by these 4 questions because it does help guide you in your thoughts, but please feel free to include as much pertinent information as you deem necessary. So I've reviewed IEPs in the past, and I saw a parent input section that was 7 pages long. And obviously there was a lot going on with that specific child in that case, so the parent included some communication from the school back and forth, but this is really your chance to put your mark on the IEP. The rest of the document is really from a school perspective, and so it really shouldn't be altered by the parents. So for example, if the IEP says that your child does not cut circles, then, and you at home see him cut circles all the time, because the writers of the IEP are only there during the school portion, they have to include what they see in school. So this is your area to know any differences from the IEP, to know anything that you're in agreement of, and just the general direction that you want to head in with this programming. Like, what are the ultimate goals that you see for your child? Are you trying to use this IEP program to lead them into college? Are you more so going into vocational training? Anything like that, you can go ahead and include in this section. And then we get into the meat of the IEP and the actual program. So we have the domains, we have formal assessments and data sources. There are 4 domains: curriculum and instruction, independent functioning, social emotional behavior, and communication. Here it explains what the annual goals and objectives are, how or what formal assessments were used to establish the present level of performance. In most cases, it's a lot of review of records, so reviewing past IEPs, reviewing past test scores, observations from therapists, from teachers, and informal assessments. Then they also include a section on where the data is sourced from. Again, you see the specific areas from formal. So the previous IEP, teacher observation and input, the parent input, informal assessments, so on and so forth. Again, this is all specific to your child and whatever has gone on in the school year. Here again are the 4 domains. Curriculum and instruction is everything academic. Independent functioning is more so those daily life skills, daily living skills, social and emotional functioning, and then of course, communication. So for the present level of performance, all IEPs must include this present level of performance by collecting baseline data. The PLP helps develop, but should also include any strategies currently being used that help ensure your child is involved in and making progress in the general education curriculum as the law requires. Essentially, this area will describe the academic and functional skills a child has, as well as areas that need further development. Functional skills include, as I mentioned, the daily living activities. It also includes social skills, mobility skills, employment skills, especially for children that are older, and skills that increase overall independence. So I'll be talking about this way more in depth in later sessions, but just so you know, the IEP, especially this present level, goals, objectives, all of that, acts as a funnel. So what you have is the present level of performance, which is a big narrative of how your child is functioning day in and day out in the school environment. From there, you find a problem area that's the most concerning, and that's how the disability is impacting performance in the general curriculum, right? So this sentence right here, the impact of the disability, this is the justification for the IEP. Like, why does my child need special education and not just general education? So it's usually a statement that reads something like, due to his or her disability, or due to his or her autism spectrum disorder, Johnny may have difficulty, and let's say this is academic achievement, so you can say has difficulty solving two-digit math problems. So that's where the disability is impacting them. And then we go into the priority educational need. So once we have the narrative, we come up with where the impact is, and then we establish what the priority educational need. So according to our impact statement, that Johnny can't solve two-digit math problems, the priority educational need is to increase his ability to solve two-digit math problems. So from there, from the priority educational need, this turns into the annual goal, which then has objectives to help you know how to measure the progress to the annual goal. So, talking about annual goals, there are academic and there are functional goals. Not all IEPs have to have functional goals, which, as I mentioned just a minute ago, target weaknesses in daily living activities and skills necessary for independence. After the IEP team determines your child's present level of performance, the team may decide that your child does not have functional needs that should be addressed in the IEP. Similarly, if your child is doing well academically, but only struggles with social skills, then all of the IEP goals might be functional skills and might not have any academic skills. However, since each goal is derived directly from that narrative, the PLP, there should be a clear reason as to why that goal was chosen. So just like you can funnel down, you should also be able to funnel up and see a clear relationship on how you got to this annual goal. So this annual goal must be related to the priority educational need, to the impact statement, and it must be mentioned in the present level of performance. In a future session, we'll also be going more in depth into the annual goals. So today I just wanted to look at the other parts of this section. So the title of the implementer. This refers to who will be working on this goal. These are most commonly either the general education teacher, special education teacher, or the therapist, so speech, occupational, physical. Similarly, it delineates who will be in charge of documenting the data on this goal. The evaluation procedures notes how the data will be recorded and progress will be monitored. So right here in this section, you'll see weekly reports, you'll see monthly collection, whatever it is for that specific goal for that specific child. So in progress monitoring, the implementer may use short tests to evaluate a student's progress in specific areas and should take place often. For example, every week, every 2 weeks, or at least once a month. The implementer should use data collected to create a graph showing progress toward meeting the IEP goal. And if you're ever wondering about your child's progress, you don't have to wait until the quarterly progress report or report card. You can receive copies of these graphs if you ask your teacher. Then we have the objectives. These are not required by law, but they're very common in practice. And these are just short-term stepping stones or a breakdown of the goal into smaller steps to show how the child will work on this. Typically, what you see is you see 4 objectives per goal. And this is because ideally, if you're trying to meet an annual goal in 1 year, and there are 4 quarters in a school year, then ideally you are trying to master 1 objective per learning quarter per semester. So that's why we typically see 4. However, I've seen objectives that I've seen goals that have 2 objectives. I've seen goals that have 7 objectives. So again, the I in IEP is individualized, and all of this will be on a case-by-case basis. The next section is the standardized test. IEP teams are responsible for determining whether students with disabilities will participate in state and district assessments. So for us, we have the Florida standards, and that the decision on participating relies on these 3 questions. They must answer those questions, but they only need to answer 1 no or more in order for the child to participate. So only if you have 3 yeses does your child participate in an alternative assessment. And these 3 questions relate to cognitive functioning and its impact on the Sunshine State standards, the amount of extensive direct instruction required, and if the child has low cognitive functioning. Whether you are taking the standardized test or an alternative assessment, accommodations that are specifically necessary for those environments will be included in this section here. Or the IEP will note that there are no accommodations that are necessary. Finally, towards the bottom of this section, we note whether or not the accommodations or modifications are not permitted during state and district assessments. I'll talk about this in a future session, but there are certain accommodations that are technically not legal to use for these standardized assessments. It doesn't mean that your child cannot use them, but it does mean that it needs to be noted, and you need to agree that you understand that your child isn't supposed to be using that during those assessments. The next section is the actual special education services that your child is receiving. Remember, the law defines special education as a specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. This specifically designed instruction should meet the child's unique needs and ensure access to the general curriculum. Specially designed instruction includes adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. This section may include things like intensive intervention in reading, specialized support in social skills, or intensive instruction in all curriculum areas, for example. It'll have a start date, which is the first day of the IEP, and an end date, which is the 1-year mark when the IEP expires, the frequency, and then the location. And location can include the regular classroom, which is the general education classroom, a resource room, separate class, special day school, other separate environment, a residential facility, or even the juvenile justice program. In terms of related services, these are services that are developmental, corrective, and supportive for your child to benefit from special education. And they most commonly include speech and/or language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, and nursing services. Nursing services, for example, are used for individuals with feeding tubes or other medical needs. These related services can also include things such as audiology services, interpreting services, and parent or teacher training. For example, a child who has seizures, diabetes, or a lethal allergy may require the teacher to be trained in specific strategies necessary to prevent and react to that specific emergency. Parent training can also be written into the IEP so that you are better able to offer continuation of services at home. For example, if you'd like to supplement your child's speech therapy services with receptive and expressive language exercises at home, the school can provide training for you to be able to do this. Depending on the child's unique needs, some children may receive related services like speech and physical therapy, but are not eligible for special education services. So you don't need an IEP in order to receive these related services. You might just need something else that's called a 504 plan. All decisions about special education and related services should be individualized, and there are no limits on the speech, physical, and occupational therapy a child may need. Then we get into the accommodations, and this falls under supplementary aids and services. These are provided in regular education classes and other education settings so that students with disabilities can participate in academic and extracurricular activities with their classmates. These include strategies and services in academic, non-academic, and extracurricular activities. Non-academic services and the extracurriculars may include sports, health services, recreation, band and chorus, and special interest groups and clubs available at the school. Sometimes a student does not need direct assistance in general education classes, for example, but may still require accommodations like extended time on tests. This is where the classroom accommodations will be noted. So for example, in the everyday life of the student, they don't struggle paying attention in the classroom. They don't need any interventions to help them participate. But when it comes time to take the test, maybe they just need a little bit of extra time in order to really process that information. This is where you note that. Examples of supplementary aids and services fall under these general categories: supports to address the environmental needs, levels of staff support, planning time, specialized equipment, pacing of instruction, presentation of subject matter, self-management, and social interaction support. Although this list is not exhaustive, those are just the most common areas. And then we'll get into the special considerations section. So as you see here, these are the areas that fall under special considerations. For healthcare, as I mentioned previously, these considerations may include services and strategies related to a child's medical well-being as appropriate. For adaptive PE, this includes any accommodations or modifications that your child may need in order to participate in physical education with his peers. CAPE, that's career and professional education. This is more so for older students, but these are industry certifications that students can seek prior to high school graduation. So for example, this might include a certificate in Microsoft suites, so understanding how to use Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, anything that might help them be a more desirable hire once they graduate high school. We have assistive technology. In the previous session of this series, I mentioned that assistive technology may include anything from just an adaptive pencil grip all the way to high-end tech, just like eye gaze devices. Anything along these lines will be included here. In terms of behavior, when your child's behavior has a negative impact on his or her ability to learn or his classmates' ability to learn, then the IEP team should refer him or her for a functional behavior assessment. If necessary, this will result in something called a PBIP, or a positive behavior intervention plan, and it will be noted right here in this section. If a PBIP is not necessary, but there are behavioral needs, then they'll be addressed otherwise through the goals and objectives, which is why we see this right here, behavior is addressed through goals and objectives. Transportation, this is very common, especially for younger children. So maybe the child elopes, maybe they're nonverbal, maybe they are just too young to be safely transported on a general education school bus, so they receive transportation services. And finally, in terms of communication needs, when a child has severe language and communication deficits, direct instruction in a mode of communication may be necessary outside of the written goals and objectives, and it will be noted here in this section. Finally, I wanted to bring your attention to the Padlet. This is where I store all of the presentations that I use in this training series, as well as all of the resources that I collect along the way. The website is padlet.com UM-NSU card/IEP. And this is continuously updated, so feel free to bookmark this page so that you can access it at later times. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you next week when we learn about the 4 domains.